All right, Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Joining us on the phones right now, GOP political strategist Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing great. Appreciate you joining us today. Before we get into some of the national headlines, let's take a look at some fundraising numbers for the big Senate race. Ted Cruz bringing in, about $3.2 million in the first 3 months of the year. Does that number surprise you?
Not necessarily. Obviously, O'Rourke's number, I think, was $7 million, was an eye-catching number. And so a lot of people have, focused on these overall numbers, but they're not maybe digging into them at all. And I dug into the Beto O'Rourke number over the weekend, and it turns out he spent $2.6 million to raise $7 million. So he's obviously doing prospecting and spending a lot of money to raise money. Now he's creating a donor base, probably of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of small donors that he can go back to. So I think he's going to be able to raise decent money, but Cruz will too, and Cruz has more money on hand, certainly. And he also needs less money. I mean, this is the other thing to keep in mind. O'Rourke is not as well known, and this is a Republican state. So the challenger is the one that really has the greater burden when it comes to fundraising. But I thought Cruz's numbers is adequate. I think that if they really turned it on, I think they could raise 20 or 30 or even maybe $40 million, given his massive fundraising base nationally. And that's actually one of the things that's interesting about this race is that the more that the national media focus on how extraordinary Beto O'Rourke is, the more Cruz will be able to hit the panic button with his donors and raise more money as well.
Yeah, well, and I would think that for Cruz and Cruz supporters, it's one of those where Beto's been running for a while now, like over a year. He's been running, and while Ted Cruz obviously was going to seek re-election, it's almost like he just kicked into campaign mode really within the last 6 months or so. He really hasn't been in that re-election mode for as long as Beto has been.
No, I think that's right. I mean, your average member of Congress in the minority party really doesn't have much of a role to play in the House. And so O'Rourke spent a lot of time last year, yes, doing small events around the state, but also raising money and creating that small dollar donor base. Cruz spent a lot of last year doing his job, serving in the United States Senate, working on his committees, which he's been very focused on. Yes, he's also been traveling the state, but he's been doing it in an official capacity. And so I don't know, everything they've been doing from a fundraising standpoint, but I think that to some extent, I think that they didn't have a primary, really an active competitive primary, and so he just wasn't raising active primary dollars, and he knew that trying to do that at a time when there were a lot of primaries around the state was probably not a good idea. So I think that's right. I think they probably kind of underplayed last year and what they could do last year, and they'll rev it up this year. And I have no doubt the Cruz team will have the resources they need to run the campaign they want, to have a significant victory, and to help Republicans down ballot, which I'm sure is part of their goal as well.
Let me ask you about Beto just overall. I had him on here on the show last Monday, and one of the things that surprised me about him, and that I did appreciate about him, is that he didn't lie to anybody.
Right.
He told you exactly how he felt. He's not trying to run to the middle. He's not trying to be a centrist or anything like that. He doesn't want you to buy an AR-15. He doesn't want you to be able to buy an AR-15. He told the audience that. He's for universal health care. He told the audience that. He is not for a border wall. He told the audience that. These are things that you've got college kids who are cheering for. You've got liberals who are cheering for. Does this make him, probably less likely to beat Cruz, obviously, in this upcoming election? But if you're looking long-term at future Democrats and future liberal voters, does this make him almost the future poster child of what liberal progressives want to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. And part of this is with his message, that can be an attractive message to, 15, 20, 25% of the state. And if you go around the state to enough places, you can find people that are really enthusiastic about that message that he has, but that's just not enough. And so, it is a little bit striking that he's not moving back to the middle at all for the general election. He's obviously kind of doing what he wants to do. He's not hired consultants at all, really. He's kind of doing it entirely on his own. He brags about not having a pollster. Well, there's a reason you have those people. You have those people to help you figure out how you can put a strategy together to get 50% plus one. And so that's the thing that's kind of funny about this is that, his sort of uncompromising left-wing liberal message is one that the far left in the state will embrace and will give money to, and the net roots will give money to, but it's not one that's going to give him a real chance to win. And so, I imagine if you're the Cruz team and you're listening to O'Rourke's interviews, you're thrilled, that he's not moving back to the middle, that he is taking the positions that he's taking, being willing to say he'll support impeachment of Trump, the other things that you cited in your interview and in others. So. Could this be where, look, the Democratic Party has a divide, and we're going to see it not just perhaps in Texas here and there, like there's a congressional race down in Houston that has this kind of dynamic, but we're going to see it around the country in primaries in some of these other states, particularly in some competitive congressional seats as the primaries, kind of occur over the next few months, and that's between the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren wing and sort of the mainstream Democratic wing, and they have different views on some of these issues. And it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that all plays out. But I think we are, to some extent, seeing what the future of the Democratic Party looks like if they don't rein this back in. And I don't know that they can. I think they've lost control of where their party goes.
Yeah. Before I move on from the Senate race, have you heard of any legitimate polling that has been done in this race recently?
Not really recently, no. I generally think O'Rourke is in the, high 30s, low 40s type range, which is about probably where he'll end up, maybe in the mid 40s. And look, I think Cruz is fine. I really do. He's going to have to run a real race. He's going to have to define O'Rourke, certainly. He's going to have to raise and spend money. But I just think O'Rourke has too many disadvantages. Now, is the environment going to help? Yes. Could the race be closer than it would be in a traditional year, in a normal year? Yes, it's possible. But no, I haven't seen a ton of polling, and honestly, it's a little early anyway.
Sure.
At this point, really. I mean, the first poll that I'll care about will be the first poll after Labor Day, because that's really when you can start figuring out who's likely to vote, and people start making decisions. So, we'll see kind of how all that plays out.
Speaker Paul Ryan announced that he's not running for re-election, but he's not going to step away as House Speaker just yet. And there's been some debate over whether or not he should step aside. What are your overall thoughts on just his announcement that he's not seeking re-election, and what does this mean for the midterm elections, if anything?
Yeah, I know some conservatives out there has some frustrations with Ryan. I generally think he's been a pretty good speaker. They've had quite a bit of success, and to the extent that conservatives are frustrated with Congress, it's more likely due to the Senate having an inability to move bills and to get the 60 votes required to do most of what they want to do. Ryan, I think, honestly, he kind of what you see is what you get. I think he really did make this decision based on family more than anything else. I don't doubt that he has some frustration with Trump, dealing with him, with the chaos, with the cloud that hangs over the White House right now. But I really don't think that's what's driving this. And I also don't think it's that there's a chance that the Republicans could lose the House. It's possible, but he's never really been that political. He's never been that focused on politics. He's always been focused on policy, and I think from his standpoint, that it was a personal decision more than anything else. Now, what does it mean for the midterms? I mean, look, this thing does send a bad signal to donors. I hope that they don't give up on the House. They certainly shouldn't. I saw just this morning the generic ballot has been moving away from the Democrats to a much more narrow Democratic advantage since January in Washington Post's ABC News, the new poll that they had out. So, look, I think Kevin McCarthy is likely to succeed unless there's some kind of bombshell revelation. I don't know whether Ryan is going to stay on the rest of the year. I think right now he's planning to. There's not a lot they need to do, to be honest with you. They have a pretty limited legislative agenda the rest of this year. Really, they just need to get a spending bill done in September and a couple of little things. So it's not clear to me that he necessarily needs to be doing that. Either way, everybody needs to focus on holding the House. I mean, if you think Trump hates Washington right now, wait till Democrats have subpoena power and an ability to impeach him through the House, and he's going to really hate Washington. So holding the House is job one, and that's what every single member of Congress, whether they're in a competitive seat or not, has to be focused on.
Before I let you go, for folks who don't know much about McCarthy, like you said, he's likely to become the next speaker. What do we need to know?
Yeah, a little bit different from Ryan. He's more of a backslapper. He has, tremendous work ethic. He's pretty aggressive. He's fairly political. I think he's reasonably conservative, but he certainly, has good relationships with K Street, knows a lot of the players. He's one of these guys that just, eats, sleeps, and breathes all this stuff. It'll be interesting to see. I think some of the hardline conservatives have some questions about McCarthy. There's been some talk that Jim Jordan, the House Freedom Caucus member, may challenge him. So we'll see. But ultimately, I think McCarthy will be a little bit less focused on policy and on substance than Ryan, but perhaps more focused on politics and fundraising than Ryan. And Ryan was an outstanding fundraiser. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of speakership he wants to put together, and he may look to do it a little bit differently than Ryan's done it.
Very interesting. Matt, tell folks how they can sign up for your newsletter and also who your guest is on your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Mac on Politics. As you know from last week, we interviewed EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt right in the middle of all the news that was out there. The most recent episode is on Syria with a national expert named Daniel Pletka, who's on Meet the Press from time to time. It works at the American Enterprise Institute. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and on the web at mackonpoliticspodcast.com. We put together a morning newsletter for Texas called Must Read Texas. It's all the top news from around the state delivered to your inbox every weekday. 3,000 Texans receive it. You can sign up for a free 1-week trial at mustreadtexas.com.
Very good, Matt. Thank you as always. We'll visit with you next week.
Thanks, Chad. Have a great week. Take care.
That's Matt Mackowiak.